Hello, everyone. I'm Mimi Lichtenstein, and today on Adventures in Luxury Travel, I am happy to have Scott Simpson here. We are going to talk all about Namibia. He is deeply traveled in this area of the world and from South Africa, so I'm happy to have him on. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Mimi. It's great to be here talking
Well,
about probably my favorite destination in Africa.
I know, and it's such a different and unique one compared to many of the other safari destinations. Would you give us a little bit of insight about your background and when you started going to Namibia when you were younger, I know?
Sure. So yeah, like you said, I'm originally from South Africa. It's where I was born. It's where I grew up. Most of that time was in Johannesburg, a little bit of time in Cape Town and Durban, but Joburg is where I went to school, university. And because there's quite limited things to do in Joburg, my parents, bless them, were big adventurers. So we would spend every weekend away and, every school vacation traveling all around Africa, mostly Southern Africa. So a lot of Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, but then a lot of that time was in Namibia. I think it's probably my dad's favorite destination as well, which is how it got passed along to me. But, we did it very differently. We had the old VW combi bus and the Land Rover Defender with the rooftop tents. And, we would just set off into the desert. There were times when you wouldn't see another vehicle for 3 days. It would just be us. We'd pull over on the side of the road, pitch the tents, sleep out overnight. You wake up in the morning and there's like leopard prints all around the tent. And yeah, it's crazy. You sort of have to call ahead to the next camp to let them know you'll be there in 3 days. And the reason you do that is so that if you don't arrive in 3 days, they know something went wrong and they need to put out the distress signal. So it's an amazing destination, and I feel very grateful that I got to explore it the way I did. 15,
well,
20,
I'm sure there are a lot of people listening that wish that was how their childhood experiences went. So we're happy to have you here. Well, let's dive into it. So for people who don't know where Namibia is, because for some people, a lot of African countries are sort of, lumped together in one general area. You can see where it is on the map, kind of southwest corner of the continent. And then would you give us a little bit of an idea of the different major areas that people go and visit when they go to Namibia?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great map. And the easy way to remember where Namibia is its original name, or one of its names, was German Southwest Africa. So kind of the clue is in the name there, Southwest Africa. This is a great little map here, in no particular order, just sort of working down. The Skeleton Coast is on the far left of the country there. That runs sort of, where that green section is. That's also the Namib Desert. So that goes all the way up there. That's commonly referred to as the land god made in anger. And I think when you show photos later, you'll probably understand why. It's stark, it's brutal, it's windy, it's freezing cold water, but probably, all that being said, one of the most beautiful parts of Namibia. You then have Sossusvlei, which is probably the most iconic region in Namibia. That's where you've got those ochre red dunes just meeting the bright blue skies. You've got Big Daddy, which is the famous sand dune that everyone climbs and takes photos of, Deadvlei. So no trip to Namibia is going to avoid Sossusvlei. Swakopmunt is a little more niche, and some itineraries would include it, some wouldn't. It's this little coastal town, big Cape fur seal population there. But near to Swakopmund is something called Savage Harbor, which is a big reason to go there. And that's where those very iconic photos of the red sand dunes crashing directly into the Atlantic Ocean take place. There's great ways to explore that area. We'll go into it in a bit more detail later, but you got to be careful there because cars have been eaten by the sea before if you get it wrong. So we'll touch on that. Windhoek is the capital of Namibia. Absolutely, probably 1-2 days there maximum. You can kind of see and do everything. There's a great church, a good museum there. There's an iconic place called Joe's Beer House where you have to go and have lunch. You can't pass through Windhoek and not go there. But yeah, it's your entryway into Namibia. There's good flights from Johannesburg and Cape Town, so it's easy to get to. There's even direct flights from Germany. So Windhoek will be your gateway in and out of Namibia. Walvis Bay, that sort of ties in with Swakopmund. Again, it's on the coast there. Giant seal colonies. There's a place called Pelican Point where you can actually kayak with the seals, which is a really fun experience. You just want to make sure you stay in your kayak because there's a lot of great white sharks sort of chasing those seals around.
Oh, yes. Good advice. Thank you.
Absolutely. The Canary Region, it's all the way up in the north of the country, sort of on the Angola border. There's a beautiful, beautiful lodge there called Swakopmund. It's a wilderness property. And this is also the region where the Himba Tribe are predominantly based. So it's a very popular place to include in Namibia itineraries, but very difficult to get to, very remote. You're not going to be self-driving up there. It's going to require flights. So it's not for every itinerary, but those who can include it absolutely should. It's gorgeous.
I'm curious, Scott, just out of curiosity, for a lot of the lodges, I know there are quite a few kind of newer lodges, but in terms of the luxury lodges in Namibia, when did that really start? How many years have they been there?
Probably for about 20 years, it's been of a sort of high standard. You know, back, like I said, when I started going there, it was largely just rest camps and, you know, campsites, and that still exists and it's still a great way to do it. But really the last sort of 20 years or so, just new luxury lodges have been opening and it's become more of a luxury travel destination.
Got it. Thank you.
Absolutely. You've then got Etosha National Park. That's where you're going to do your safari in Namibia. So it's very different to any other kind of safari that you'll do in Southern Africa. It's going to be completely different to a South Africa or a Botswana. Etosha is these salt pans. So just as far as the eye can see, it's this white ground. And because it's so dry, there's very limited water sources around. So all the animals tend to congregate around these same water sources. So it makes for really good game viewing. And that also means there's great predator-prey interaction because they're all having to come to the same water sources. So there's a lot of excitement that happens there. Good walking safaris in that area as well. Good desert-adapted rhino sighting that you can see on foot. So it's worth including. If you've done a lot of safari already on that itinerary, it could potentially be skipped, but otherwise definitely include it there. Damaraland is, that sort of area just to the east there of the Skeleton Coast. Famous mostly or largely for its rock art. This area has been inhabited for tens of thousands of years and has some of the oldest African cave paintings anywhere in the world. So areas like Twyfelfontein, Spitzkoppe, which is just further down. You've got this really great rock art, and it's one of the reasons that Namibia is famous as UNESCO World Heritage Site there. Damaraland's also got some of the most prolific desert elephant sightings anywhere, and they're these desert adapted elephants. They've got these long skinny legs. They look quite different. People often think that they have bigger feet than normal elephants, but they don't. It's just because the legs are skinnier. But you'll see a lot of that in Damaraland. It's desolate there, but again, desolately beautiful. And then lastly, we've got the Fish River Canyon. So that's all the way at the bottom of the country. That actually borders South Africa. It's near the Orange River. The Fish River Canyon is not too popular with Americans just because it's very difficult to get there kind of as a standalone destination within Namibia. If you're driving up from South Africa or you're coming out that way, it's sort of easier to include. But it's the second largest canyon in the world after the Grand Canyon. And where possible, we love to include it. It's truly breathtaking.
Beautiful. Well, there's definitely a lot to see. Most times when you're going to a place like this, you have to transit through a major city. And in Namibia, it happens to be here. Do you want to give us a little insight for people who are flying in and probably flying out of here? How much time do they have to spend? Or, the flights usually come in the middle of the night, in the morning. How does that work?
Yeah, I think because there's so many routes to get you, sort of via Qatar in the Middle East or from Germany or flying up from South Africa, it's not a destination where there's generally an arrival time. Most people do an overnight on the front end. It's quite rare that your flight would arrive at a time that works well enough for you to get out the same day. Whether you're picking up your hire car and starting a self-drive or whether you're flying out, most people overnight. We also always recommend an overnight, especially at the moment with all the flight delays and disruptions. You don't want to have a really important part of your trip on that first day that you could potentially miss out on. So
right.
Cushion. Yeah. Windhoek is probably, like I said, about a day's worth of activities an afternoon. It's a fun little city. It's got a very strong German influence. The Germans were largely the ones who sort of not colonized, but inhabited Namibia for a long time. So, for example, there's a famous restaurant there, Joe's Beer House, where you're eating sauerkraut and German beer. And it's just a really unique place, but they infuse that with Namibian sort of dishes. So you're eating a lot of game meat. There'll be, a game lasagna, which might have kudu and zebra in it. There's crocodile fillets. It's a pretty crazy place. But aside from that, then there's a really good museum that gives you a good history of the country. There's a Genocide Memorial there. Unfortunately, they're that's sort of a conversation for another day, but it didn't have the best 100 years after the Germans arrived. And it's important to just learn about that so you understand it when you're traveling around the country.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, a famous church, a famous fortress, that's really everything that you need to see and do in Windhoek.
Okay. Well, as we go through this, normally we dive into experiences first, and so many experiences in Namibia are kind of wrapped up in the environment that you're in, the part of the country, as well as the hotels or accommodations. So we're kind of going to touch on all of it about the same time. Let's start with Fish River Canyon, which reminds me of a very iconic spot in the United States.
Absolutely. And as I say, we don't have to spend long on this because it's not honestly going to form a big part of a lot of people's itineraries just because you have to go all the way out there. It's about 800 kilometers from Windhoek. But for people who do go, it's well worth it. There's really great hiking there. And something people can do is actually do a full 5-day hike. It's called the Fish River Canyon Hike, Fish River Trail, and it's about 60 miles. It goes all the way down. You need at least 5 days. You can only do it May through September. The rest of the year, it's too hot. There's the risk of flash flooding. So they only open it for that hiking trail for that time. Normally it takes 5 days, but interestingly, there's this annual competition where people see how fast they can do it. And the current record is 6.5 hours. An ultramarathon runner did it. So it's a cool place. I love to include it, but hard to get to. So don't worry too much about it.
Well, I love when I'm preparing for these shows, learning new things about a country that I had no idea about. And this is one of them. Tell us a little bit about this town that, for those of you who are just listening, it's a photo of a big kind of sand dune with what looks like abandoned houses in the background. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, Kelmanskop it's an iconic part of Namibia. This is a little town that was originally founded in around, I think, 1908 when they discovered the first diamond. They were doing train tracks through it and they found diamonds. So there was a sudden rush of Germans, and suddenly this German town just sprung up in the middle of the desert. But it was affluent, they were finding diamonds. So there were these big manor houses built. There was an ice factory so that people could have cold drinks. It really was a bustling little metropolis. And then, 2 world wars happened. That sort of hurt it. The diamond field started drying up. South Africa discovered diamonds, so a lot of people moved down there. And then in 1956, the town was just abandoned completely. The last resident left. And what's interesting about it is it's just completely been left. And like you can see, just the Namibian desert has been reclaiming it. The sand blows in, so every year there's less and less of it. And these are photos that you can take. You crawl in through a window or through a door and you explore these old manor houses. And it's just a bizarre place. It feels like you're in a dream, honestly.
Yeah.
But again, great for our self-drivers sort of going along the route towards Swakopmund. Very interesting place.
First of all, we could touch on this at the end too, but I love that Namibia, you can self-drive because not every, destination in Africa has that ability. And number 2, about the photography. Namibia lends itself so well to people who are great photographers or perhaps not so great. And it may be helps you look like you're a great photographer because the settings are so beautiful, including this one in Sossusvlei. Tell us a little bit about, these are those big iconic sand dunes you were touching on.
That's right. Yeah. And I can only echo what you said about the photography. I mean, places like Kelmanskop, Sossusvlei, you want to be in these places in the early morning, the late afternoon, because you get that beautiful light. During the day, it is very bright and very harsh. No itinerary to Namibia is not going to include Sossusvlei. This is probably the most iconic region. The biggest sand dune there is called Big Daddy. There's a smaller one opposite it a lot of people don't know about called Big Mama. So they didn't get too creative with their naming. Sossusvlei, you can actually climb these dunes. Probably takes about an hour and a half to get up and about an hour and a half to get down. Again, you want to be doing that in the early mornings or afternoons because it gets hot and the wind starts blowing and it's quite an experience. And then in Sossusvlei, there's an area called Deadvlei, which is a big salt pan where there are these petrified trees. Not sure petrified is the right word, but essentially it was a sort of a lake, an area full of water. And then the river changed course and it just got completely cut off. So it just turned into salt pans. But because it never rains there, these trees don't decompose. It's not like they've fallen over. So they're literally just, oh, there you go.
Yeah. I knew you had a photo somewhere.
They just exist there and you get really great photos here. This is probably one of the most Instagram spots in Namibia for those influencers out there.
And I think for people who have been, people just say it's desolate, but it's so beautiful. It's everything looks dead and barren, but it's so beautiful. It's like a combination of things that perhaps you wouldn't think.
There's beauty in that. There's beauty in the sort of starkness of the destination, and
Mm-hmm.
combined with the lack of people. I mean, you think about it, Namibia is twice the size of Germany. Germany has 80 million people. Namibia has 2.5 million people. So it just gives you an idea. It's the second least populated country in the world. So you're
Okay.
not going to be running into people. And ironically, COVID, it's been perfect. It's the perfect destination. Everything's outdoors anyway. Your meals are outdoors. Your activities are outdoors. There's no one else. You're not bumping into a lot of people. So it's been quite popular the last 2 years during COVID for those people who have been adventurous enough to do it.
And tell us a little bit about the kayaking with seals. They're seals or sea lions?
Cape fur seals.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, they're adorable.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the most popular place is Pelican Point, just near Walvis Bay. And they are just, tens and tens of thousands of these seals. Depending on the time of year you go, if they're breeding, that's a really fun time because there are all these pups. The pups are just absolutely adorable. And you just hear this like almost mewing like cats coming from the beach. So yeah, when you jump in on these kayaks, you head out and they're splashing all around you. They're incredibly playful animals. It's not unheard of for them to jump onto the front of the kayak and sort of hang out with you. Like I said, there are a lot of sharks in these waters, so it's not, the most stress-free life for them. So I think they enjoy being able to jump on your kayak and be safe for a little bit.
Right. They see you as maybe a little bit of a safe harbor.
Yep.
And then Sandwich Harbor, I know from our conversation before that, tell me what's so unique about this destination.
Yeah, so this is in that sort of same Swakopmund Walvis Bay region. This is somewhere that you cannot self-drive to yourself. So what you're going to do is leave your vehicle and go through a tour company. Obviously we have connections there, and you'll go in one of their vehicles. But the reason that's so important is that how you get here is you actually drive along the coast. So between where the sand dunes meet the ocean, there's this thin strip of land, and you go up there in a vehicle. It's one of the most crazy drives you'll ever do. And then you get to sort of the end and you can go up the sand dune in the vehicle and, perch on the top, have drinks there, have lunch, and then back down along the beach to where you left your car. The reason it's so important you do this with a professional is that thin strip of land is not there all the time. If you start driving that and the tide is coming in, you will find yourselves pressed up against the sand dunes, and they are so steep that you're not going to be able to drive up there in your little hire car. So what happens is you get stuck, the tide comes in, and your car gets washed out to sea. And this happens every year or two. There's a story about some tourist whose car was found 2 miles down the beach, and they had a big bill from their hire car company. So Sandwich Harbor, use a professional.
Okay, thank you. That is definitely good advice. And this looks like a little photo of maybe your family from way back when, but I don't think it is.
This is not, but it's a very similar experience.
Well, clearly this is in Damaraland, and tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Spitzkoppe is a really interesting site. Again, it's popular with campers. There's a really good campsite there. And what's cool about camping in Namibia, and I mean, I'm saying this even though none of our clients really camp, but you can do activities like this, is that the campsites are a part of the surroundings. It's not like in the US where often you have to camp and then drive to the national park each day. You are in the park. You are on Spitzkoppe. So this is often called Africa's Matterhorn. It's this giant sort of soaring peak just in the middle of sort of the desert. You have famous, this is the arch. This is another very Instagram spot. And in the same region, this is full of that cave art that we spoke about earlier. There's dozens and dozens of sites. This is where some of the earliest Namibian inhabitants were living. So there's beautiful hiking trails, and you're hiking and you turn a corner and there's a desert adapted elephant, or you see from the top of Spitzkoppe, you look down and there's a desert adapted rhino. This is one of the only regions in Namibia where rhinos are free roaming. In fact, I would probably say one of the only places anywhere in Africa where they're actually free roaming. They're not in a national park or a game. Very cool.
And I think we have one more photo of there. Hold on one second. There, again, such beautiful places to go. So there's, this is another campsite. I mean, imagine just sort of pulling off and having this place all to yourself to camp at. That would be fun. But to your point, not many of our clients are doing that. Then we get in a little bit more of some of the culture and history of the beautiful cave art going back. Tell us more about how old these are and where they are.
Yes, I mean they found the earliest bone fragments from humans, I think 13 million years ago. So we know that this area has been inhabited for sort of as long as history exists. And then they started finding these cave paintings, and I think they're about 5,000 to 8,000 years old. So we know that they were inhabited back then. Mm-hmm. These ones in particular, in Twyfelfontein, are about 2,500 years old, and they're very well preserved. Again, because because Namibia doesn't get very much rain at all, things like these are just perfectly preserved for thousands of years. They haven't been eroded. They're clear as day. You can get right up there and look at them. Twyfelfontein is an interesting site. It's Namibia's only UNESCO World Heritage Site. They have guides there. I'll be very honest with you. The guides there are quite weak. A lot of them don't seem particularly bothered. It's kind of an issue that we've always had. So you want to go there with a guide that either we've given you or from your lodge. There's a great lodge nearby called Mawani Mountain Camp, and they can come and give you a proper experience. But yeah, it's got a very long history, and there's been a lot of different tribes, people moving south and moving up, or coming down through East Africa, through the Great Rift Valley. And it's just this melting pot of sort of cultures, and each one has its own art style. And for people who like history and, get a kick out of this, they can spend days just exploring these sites.
Yeah, well, they're beautiful. I know there's a lot of people in the US when they go out west. A lot of my clients want to go and see some of the old, in the caves or on the rocks. And when you go to Namibia, I mean, it does look so well preserved that this is that old, and you can clearly tell what these animals are.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't draw that even today.
All right, well, let's transition to one of the most iconic spots in Namibia and very much photographed, the Skeleton Coast. Obviously, it's on the coast. Skeleton Coast probably has its name for a reason. I know there's a lot of shipwrecks. Tell us a little bit more about this area.
Yeah, Skeleton Coast, after Sossusvlei, probably the second most sort of iconic region. Something we haven't really touched on is the different ways to do Namibia, self-driving versus flying, or some combination of the two. Somewhere like the Skeleton Coast is actually not somewhere you can really self-drive to. It's a national park, so you need permits to get in. They're quite careful about letting people in. But if you're flying in Namibia and you go from point A to point B, these flights don't just go as the crow flies. It's not just a JetBlue flight getting you from one point to the other. They involve these areas. So the Skeleton Coast, your plane will divert and you'll skim low over the ocean. These photos were actually taken on a recent trip. They'll involve the flight as part of the experience. It's not just a transfer from A to B. And you're swooping low over these dunes in the ocean. Your guide's telling you about the shipwrecks you're seeing out the window. There's one. What's crazy is that shipwreck there used to be in the water, but the ocean the dunes are slowly reclaiming the ocean. They move, a couple of feet each year and take over. So these shipwrecks, you can find them, a mile inland in some places. It's crazy. But yeah, the Skeleton Coast, it was originally, most of these shipwrecks happened because the Germans came looking for diamonds. And it was one of the most prolific area for diamonds ever. They tell you stories about how they used to find them. They would wait till the nighttime, and then they would lie on their stomachs and just look along the beach at eye level and then see where the moon was glinting off things and literally just go over and pick up these diamonds, the size of peas. It's crazy. But this cost a lot of lives as well. These shipwrecks would happen. It's completely rocky. It's very wavy. It's windy. So countless ships washed up. And, what's really sad is a lot of people survived these shipwrecks and thought, woohoo, I made it. And then ended up passing away on the Skeleton Coast because there's no water for hundreds of miles. It's boiling hot. There's no shelter. So that's why you're seeing shipwrecks. You're seeing plane crashes. There's whole whale skeletons. There's a story about a shipwreck that happened and everyone managed to get to shore. And they were there for about 18 hours and they were trying to send other ships to rescue them, but they were getting bashed up against the rocks and everything was getting quite dire. So what they did is they actually chartered a plane to come and rescue these people. And about 20 miles away, the plane crashed. It got caught in a big sandstorm. So the plane that was supposed to be rescuing them now crashed. So now there's more people stuck there. And I think they were there for about 26 days before they eventually managed to get everyone out. but it just gives you an idea of like, and this is not ancient history, this is modern history, how sort of remote and desolate this area is. That being said, like we keep coming back to, there is beauty in that sort of rawness. There's the animals here, you're seeing desert adapted elephants, desert adapted rhinos, not so much in that beach area. But for example, there's a lion population that lives in the Skeleton Coast. And this is the only place in Africa where lions have ever been seen hunting things like Cape fur seals and seagulls. And they just live on the beach, like lions splashing along in the waves. That's unheard of. So just really great place.
Right. So here's some lions, but these are in Etosha National Park.
These lions decided to make their lives a little easier and live in Etosha.
Yeah, clearly with the water source, like you mentioned. I mean, you would notice visibly the difference if you went on a safari in a different country and you came here, the lions and what they look like.
Yes. Yeah. Now, everything in Namibia looks a little bit different just because it's had to adapt to that sort of harsh climate. Mm-hmm. And Etosha is very easy to spot in photographs. It's that white sort of salt pan floor with just these watering holes sort of scattered all around. And like I said earlier, because everyone has to coexist in these same water sources, you see a lot of predator-prey interactions. These lions might be drinking 6 feet from an impala or a kudu, and they just have to trust each other because that's the only water there is. But fairly often that trust fails, and then you get to see a lot of exciting activities. Etosha has 4 of the 5 big 5. Don't have buffalo, but they have the others. It's also a great place, the private conservancies that are dotted all around. You can actually do good walking safaris and see rhino on foot, which is quite unusual for Africa. Mm-hmm. This is probably Namibia's most iconic animal, the oryx. These beautiful antelope with these sweeping horns. Those horns can be up to 1.5 meters long. So I think it's about, 3 feet. And they're probably the most iconic animal. You'll see them all the way through Namibia. It's very strange driving around Namibia because you don't know what's going to be around any corner. It's not like another country where there's national parks and fences and conservancies. All these animals are just free roaming. They're coexisting with local communities. And then there are these added elements, like the Germans in World War I were breeding horses that they were using. And when the war ended, they just let all their horses go, thinking they were just going to die because they didn't want to ship them home. Lo and behold, these horses have thrived there. So it's the only place in Africa, I don't know the world, but the only place in Africa where there's actually wild horses. And, you turn a corner and you just see this herd of 50 wild horses charging across the road that don't belong to anyone. They look beautiful. They're strong. They're glossy.
That's interesting because we do have wild horses in the southeast part of the U.S. I was in Cumberland Island earlier this year, and there's some there. And I know that there's some in the Outer Banks. But I wouldn't say that they look super robust and healthy, like, someone that is maybe had one being taken care of. So that's interesting that in this environment that they excel so much.
Yeah, no, it's been a very unique thing. No one expected them to survive, but
yeah. And I love this photo because here you can see that there's, I think, 4 different types of animals. And they look like they're peacefully coexisting, but perhaps that changed moments after the photograph.
The thing in these situations is these antelope and the wildebeest, they're actually more comfortable if they can see the lions, because if they can see them, they know they're not about to be eaten. They can run away. It's when they can't see the lions, that's when they're edgy and their ears are twitching and they're looking around. So, this is why an African safari is so great. Your guide is going to tell you these stories and explain these interactions, and then you start understanding it and seeing it. And you suddenly start realizing when something's not right. You'll be looking at a herd of zebra and everyone looks a bit edgy and the zebras all looking to the left, and then you guys will look to the left and suddenly you'll see a lion, and then that's when you turn the car off and you pour a GNC and you just wait, because it could take 1.5 hours, 2-3 hours, but those are the moments that you live for on safari, when there's just sudden explosions of activities. You're not going to see that at Busch Gardens.
No. And just that it's so unpredictable, it makes it obviously even more fun. And then, even though you have these very dry deserts, you also have some beautiful waterfalls.
Yeah, so this is up in that Canary Region that we touched on earlier. That's one of only 5 perennial rivers in Namibia, and a couple of places along. There are these beautiful falls. Poopa Falls here is one of the more famous. Again, quite challenging to get to, so probably not a place a lot of people will see. these were actually named after the Herero people, and Poopa means foam in their local language. So these were originally called the Foaming Falls. So yeah, if you can get here, they're great. Again, you got to make sure you're going at the right time of year, because often this river almost dries up, and then these aren't particularly impressive. But yeah, when you're up at Serikafima, if you're staying at that lodge, you're doing river-based activities, you're going boating, you're going canoeing. These are the kinds of sites that you can see up in that region.
Beautiful. And I think this camp is part of what you might have called the greatest day, if you were going to do something really over the top. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is something that this camp does really well, Hohen of Skeleton Coast. If you spend 3 nights there or more, and we wouldn't recommend spending any less than 3 nights. There's so much to do and see in the surrounding area. It's also very remote. You're not driving here. You are flying in. That is the only way. You're making an effort to get here, so you want to make the most of it. But they do something very cool. So they can actually drive all the way down the Hohenab River. So it's a riverbed. It's dry. But the river is underground. So you're driving on top of the river. And then because it sort of comes to the surface every now and again, you'll turn a corner and there'll just be this oasis in front of you, this absolute green, verdant area full of trees and grass and animals. And then you go half a mile further and it's back to being complete desert because the river's gone back underground. So you follow this river in their vehicle all the way to the coast, and it's a really stunning drive. It takes a couple hours, but you're seeing things on the way. You're stopping and looking at these little animals. It's great. You then get to the Skeleton Coast and spend a couple of hours. You'll have lunch there. You'll visit these shipwrecks, and it's very interactive. You can get on these shipwrecks. You can explore them. You can go through the galley and look through the portals, take these famous photos. There's crashed planes, broken cars, get photos with the whale skeletons. You spend a couple of hours doing that, but then now, because it's getting late, rather than have to drive all the way back up the dry riverbed, they just send a plane. So you all hop on a plane and you just fly back. You do a sort of loop over the Skeleton Coast like we spoke about to get those great shots that we looked at earlier. You land at camp 20 minutes later. It's cold beer waiting for you, and that was a day that you'll never forget.
Sounds like a good day.
It is.
What I love about this photo too is that in the bottom right you can see the elephants, right? The scale, it's hard if you didn't know those were elephants, it would be hard to know what the scale is. But now that you see that they're an elephant, you can imagine how big and vast this whole area is.
Exactly. And these elephants are very not habituated, but they're not scared of people. There's no poaching in this region. No one's hunting these elephants. They have no reason to be scared of people. Weirdly enough, the reason for that is their tusks are very brittle because they sort of are kind of nutrient starved. These elephants also don't live nearly as long as a normal elephant would. Their lifespans, I think, 20 to 30 years as opposed to 80 years, just because they're not really getting the nutrition they need. So yeah, their tusks are really brittle, so no one really poaches them anyway. So it's great to view them.
Great defensive mechanism.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people who go on a safari, learning about the culture and the tribes of the people who have been there for a long time is a big part of it, especially, with families and kids. Tell us a little bit about the Himba Tribe.
Yeah, so this is something that you'll see up in the north of the country. And, everyone talks about the Himba Tribe, but there are multiple tribes across Namibia. You got the Herero as well, who have a really storied history. But something Serikafima does very well are these sort of mutually respectful cultural interactions with the Himba Tribe. Like, we're very, as a company, cautious against, organizing cultural interactions. Too often, especially in East Africa, South Africa, they're kitsch, they're awkward. You're just there so they can sing and dance and you can buy their beads. This is absolutely not the case sort of in this part of Africa. Namibia has done a really good job of making sure that these communities are equally benefiting from the tourism that's coming to these regions. So the Himbas, they're a sort of semi-nomadic tribe. They build these huts and then they sort of move them every now and again. Cattle is a big part of the life there. Something that's really interesting about how they set these huts up is there's something called the Okuruwo, and I may have butchered that because my Himba is not particularly good. But what it is it's a sacred fire, and it's built in the middle of the camp, and only the chief's hut is allowed to face this fire. All the other huts have to face the other way. And one of the biggest faux pas you can ever make in Namibia, and they'll tell you this when you go to make sure you don't do it, is walk between this fire, the sacred fire, and the chief's hut, because that channel is considered sort of a conduit. It's how he speaks to their god, Mukuru. And at nighttime, they take a fragment of that fire and they move it into the chief's hut, and then the fire goes out. And then the next morning, they use that fragment to relight the fire again, and it's an eternal flame. It's never supposed to go out.
Wow.
So, yeah, they tell you things like this. They have these beautiful singing voices. They sing and dance, and there's such joy that they give out of that. The women, as you can see, they have this red ochre and buttermilk fat mixture that they put all over themselves to give that beautiful sort of red color in their hair and their skin.
Mm-hmm.
I always sort of assumed that was more insect and sun protection, but when I visited them, I learned that wasn't actually the case. It's 99% aesthetic. I think I must have a bit of a case because these people are beautiful and they live in this sun, this harsh sun, yet they look like this. I mean, I've seen what people look like here in Florida and they get only half of the amount of sun. So I think there must be some kind of credit to it.
Yeah, well, we should all figure out what they're doing. And we always love, we talk a little bit about being active wherever we go and we're on the show. And in Namibia, you can go out on horseback. You can go mountain bike riding. There's one of your colleagues.
Yep. Those are usually e-bikes. The cycling is quite tough there just because of the thick sand and things. So these fat tired e-bikes, so you don't have to do all that much pedaling.
Excellent. You can get as much exercise as you would like.
Exactly.
And ATVs and, four-wheelers in the desert, which my kids love to do. That's always a fun adventure.
Great way to get around. And they do that very respectfully as well. You're not just ramping over the sand dunes, perhaps like you would in Dubai or something. It's all very well managed.
Well, everything in Dubai is done, I think, a little bit differently. And over the top, we always love to talk about over the top ideas, and hot air balloons always fit into that category, literally and figuratively, I guess. When you're going to go out on a hot air balloon, I know there's certain areas of the country where you would do it and wouldn't do it. Do you have a place that you would suggest?
That sort of greater Sossusvlei region is probably one of the most popular. It's got a really good landscape for it. You can then soar over those red dunes. When you're all the way up there and you look down, you also see these things called fairy circles, and it's this unique natural phenomena in Namibia. No one knows what causes them. Scientists to this day, look at that. Scientists to this day don't know what causes them. There's all sorts of theories about their old termite mines that have died, or there's a certain kind of plant that grew there and killed everything surrounding it. But it's just one of these inherently mysterious things, another thing that Namibia throws at you. And what's interesting about that is they've done studies where they've transported the sand from inside these fairy circles away, and they've grown things in, and everything grows fine. But if you try and plant something in the middle of there, it almost immediately dies. So everyone's very confused by the whole thing. But the reason I mention it is when you're on these hot air balloon safaris in the Sossusvlei region, you're seeing things like this. You're passing over herds of oryx below you. If you get lucky, you'll see the wild horses running around. They always end with a champagne breakfast. So they will, I won't say gently land. Sometimes these hot air balloon landings can be a little more of a controlled crash. It's not unusual for the basket to end up on its side and kind of everyone crawling out. But you go from there, the vehicle will take you to a gorgeous champagne breakfast set up on one of these dunes and then head back to the lodge afterwards. So wherever possible, we love to recommend hot air ballooning in Namibia. It's absolutely fun.
And it's not all about big animals like elephants and rhinoceroses. It's also about the little tiny ones. Tell us a little bit about, when they're out on when somebody's out on a walk, they're not just, again, looking around for all the big animals they might see. They're also looking deep down in the desert to maybe discover somebody like this.
Exactly. You're not going to Namibia to see the Great Migration and, the 10,000 wildebeest, crossing the Mara River. You're really there to learn about these unique and completely, standalone ecosystems. So you'll be walking with your guide on a nature walk and you'll be looking around and you'll think that there's not a living soul within 10,000 miles. He'll say, I guarantee you that within 10 feet of us, I can find 10 animals. And you go, no, there's no way. And he pokes a stick in the ground and he wiggles it around. And there you go. Here's this adder. The previous photo was the webfoot gecko. And the fascinating part is they explain how these animals survive out there. Like this little guy has no eyelids. So what happens is the fog that rolls in because the cold Atlantic River is cold Atlantic Ocean is meeting this hot desert air. So there's a lot of fog in these areas and mist. So it collects on his eyes, and then he just licks his own eyeballs, and that's how he gets his nutrition. Like, you would have no idea that that's a thing. The adder, he's got his own little sort of ways that he's evolved to survive in this region. There's a spider. It's called the dancing white lady spider. And it's not dangerous at all, so there's nothing to be sort of scared about. But it's these ghostly white spiders. And one of the things that they've evolved to survive is they'll try and spend most of their time on the top of sand dunes. And the reason for that is they get hunted by these hornets that live in the area. And if they see or hear one of these hornets, they tuck into a little ball, all their legs, and they just roll and they throw themselves down these dunes. And they can go so fast. I don't know if it's 30, 40, 50 miles an hour, but you'll sometimes be driving along and you'll just see this thing go racing down. And it's one of these dancing white lady spiders sort of escaping from a hornet. To be fair, they hunt the hornets too, so it's a bit of give and take. But that's what you're learning about in Namibia. It's these tiny little creatures that are just so often overlooked. And if you go out at night, they also do this with scorpions. The scorpions are actually fluorescent. So the guide will go out with a UV light. And you do this on foot, sort of from around your lodge. After dinner, your guide might say, hey, let's go out for 20 minutes if anyone's interested. And he'll turn over some rocks and you'll see these beautiful scorpions. And they just glow iridescent under this UV light. And again, he explains about how they've survived to live there. So these are the cool parts of Namibia. This is why you're going there. It's
yeah. And obviously, I mean, adults can be completely engaged in this, but imagine kids, right, who can talk about so much of this in their science class when they get home, or, I mean, there's so many projects and deep dives they could do if they're coming to Namibia.
Exactly.
And then we talked, all right, about the whole country at this point. We haven't dove that deep into accommodation. So let's touch on some of our favorite ones, which are definitely luxurious, and oftentimes they're like an oasis in the desert, right? Which seems like you wouldn't find this type of luxury in the middle of a desert or in the middle of these desolate places, but trust us, they are there. This is one that you touched on already. Sarah Kafima, you want to tell us a little bit more about this one?
Yeah, so this is probably one of the only lodges in Namibia on a river, on the Canary River. Depending on the water levels at different times of year, you can go boating, canoeing. A lot of big crocodiles in this river, so canoeing might not be for everyone. Make sure you follow instruction. But probably one of the most luxurious lodges in Namibia. Beautiful glass-fronted rooms, so you get these beautiful views out over the river. Just a really, really nice place to be. Mm-hmm. Air conditioning, so when it gets hot, you don't die.
Yes, that is key. And they're known for having a lot of different activities. Like you mentioned, there is a lot to do when you are here. They're one of the wilderness safari lodges, which we love. I dove deep on all of them this year when I did my certification. And this one is personally on my list for when I come to Namibia. So highly recommend it. And then here's another picture of, this is the inside of one of the rooms with these big, beautiful photos of, tribes in Namibia. And you could see the hut in the background, like we looked at earlier.
You see those thatch roofs. Those are especially designed to sort of make sure the rooms stay cool, because Namibia can get hot. Maybe 100 degrees Fahrenheit certain times of year. So you want that fan above the bed. You want that thatch roof. You want to be on the river getting those breezes. And these lodges are designed very cleverly to take advantage of all that. And
we will talk about ideal time to come at the very end. So we'll touch on that too. Another beautiful shot. Clearly, it's sort of at sunset time of Honeb Skeleton Coast, also a wilderness safaris camp. Tell us a little bit about this one.
Yes, we touched on this earlier when we spoke about the day where you drive down to the Skeleton Coast and then fly back. This is probably one of the most remote camps anywhere in Namibia. It's just hundreds of miles from anything else. Like I said, you can't self-drive here. You have to fly in, or they have to come collect you in one of their vehicles. It's these stretch canvas style accommodations, but still very, very luxurious. A lot of wildlife passes through this camp. It's sort of in a valley with mountains on either side. So it's a natural corridor for wildlife. So you might be sitting in your tent having a G&T watching the sun go down, and literally from behind your tent, 4 feet past you is going to pass these desert adapted elephants, and they'll brush against your tent. It's just crazy how sort of intimate it is with nature.
And then Zanier, I think it was National Geographic that gave them sort of a best design award, because the architecture of the building of their individual accommodations and the whole place is very integrated into the rocks, as you can see surrounding them.
Yeah, as you can see here, it's literally built on these granite rock outcrops. A lot of up and down. This is not a camp for anyone with mobility issues. A lot of sort of wooden stairways going up and down. But that pool has one of the best views anywhere in Namibia. And you can sit there and look down with binoculars. They include binoculars in your room and see these herds of oryx, wild horses, desert adapted elephants. And yeah, really great activity from Sonop. They do good ATV tours, good cycling, horse riding. Another good place to do hot air ballooning from would be Sonop. Just another really great option.
Okay. And Quessy Dunes. Again,
Yeah.
it's hard to see from here, the perspective, but you can see in the very middle a hot air balloon floating above it to give you an idea of how vast and open this area is.
Yeah, it's one of the newer lodges in Namibia. Something that they do very well is Quessy in particular is located very close to what's called an International Dark Sky Reserve. And this is an official designation. They don't hand that title out, to many places. And what that means is it has some of the lowest light pollution levels anywhere in the world. And there are very, very strict requirements about sort of how much light pollution is allowed. So at night, the camp will just go absolutely dark. And then they have these things called star beds. So you have a full bed outside. It's adjacent to your room. And you're looking up and you're looking at the stars. And it is guaranteed to be the best night sky you will ever see in your life. It's a big part of the reason why people come out here.
And star beds are one of my favorite things. And I think earlier we showed a photo perhaps of what one of the night skies look like, not specific to this area, but it gives you a little bit of an idea. Oh, here it is. But you could see, right? It just looks like part of the sky is almost white, but it's just stars all clumped together.
I'd say that's not even like a long exposure or Photoshop. That is literally what you are seeing when you're out in these camps. It is breathtaking. You see meteorites and just nothing else like it.
Absolutely stunning.
Certain lodges as well, I know, and Beyond Desert Lodge, they have this telescope. I don't know how much this thing costs, but it looks like it belongs at NASA. It's fully computer controlled, and you can tell them what you want to look at, and they program it, and it zooms to that star. But they take full advantage of that. And they have an on-site sort of astronomer who gives these talks about what you're looking at. So they fully embrace this sort of dark sky reserve idea, and they incorporate it. And like I said, at nighttime, it's a bit of a frowned upon if you were to suddenly put your light on or put your phone torch on and start waving it around. The whole point is to have this whole place blanketed in darkness so that everyone gets to enjoy this complete blackness.
And I think you really feel what a small little part of the world you are when you're surrounded by all of this emptiness.
Yeah. And this particular lodge as well takes full advantage of that. All the fronts of the rooms are glass. So you have these uninterrupted views out over the surrounding area, up. You feel like you're outdoors even when you're indoors.
Mm-hmm. And this is the And Beyond Sossusvlei, which is beautiful. They're all beautiful. Another wilderness safari lodge, Little Kulala. Kulala, I think do you know what it means? I think it means, is it to sleep?
Sure.
I think it does. I think it is. And I think that, gives you a little bit of an idea. You're going to go there and have very restful, peaceful night's sleep when you're in bed. And then during the day, you get to go on beautiful adventures or hang out by their gorgeous pool.
Exactly. And what's really great about Little Kulala and its sister camp, Kulala Desert Lodge, is they're located closest to the entrance to Sossusvlei. So you can't just drive in there yourself. You have to wait for the park to open in the early morning. So because of their location, you can be the first one to that gate. So you are the first people arriving at Sossusvlei. You get the entire thing to yourself. So they sort of very well situated for that region. And then, like this photo shows, you can actually go on the outside of your room. There's a staircase going up to the rooftop, and there'll be a bed set up there for you. So again, you can, fall asleep up there, fall asleep under the stars. And whenever you're ready, you just go down and sleep in your room inside. A lot of people don't. You might just fall asleep and wake up there in the morning. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Nice. There's no malaria in Namibia. That's one of the good reasons to go there. So don't have to worry about mosquitoes and things like that.
And both Little Kulala and Kulala Desert Lodge have sleep outs. So that's another reason to go there. Anjuli Ridge, you mentioned that earlier. Tell us a little bit more about this one.
Yeah, again, sort of built into one of these granite outcrops, very cleverly designed in the sense that it captures the breeze that passes through this valley all the time. It's sort of a continuous wind that blows through. And the rooms are completely open fronted. There's nothing sort of between you and the elements. And it's just like natural air conditioning, honestly, just sort of passing through here. But just a really well located lodge right in the center of everything you want to do, from the rock cave paintings to the desert elephants. Great ATVing from here. Well located lodge, one of the newer ones, just fun place to be.
And you know what? They all look so different. That's what's fun about them too. And I think the very end one is going to be the most different. But you're not going to just go from one lodge to another and not feel the difference in the lodges, right? They don't really look, anything like any of the other ones. Here's another picture of Anjuli Ridge. It's just absolutely breathtaking.
Anjuli also has these fun safari vehicles where they're like double decked. So on the top of the safari vehicle is another row of seats. So if you want to sit up on that row, and this is not because they want to cram more people in, it's so you have the flexibility. So it's really popular with photographers because you can get that little bit higher, and it's a really fun experience. Kids really enjoy it as well.
Yeah, it's like being on a flybridge of a boat.
Exactly.
So Shipwreck Lodge, this one, I think for people who have seen, here's another one of the very iconic photos. It's just so unique and different. Tell us more.
Sure. Yeah, Shipwreck Lodge is iconic and really nice because it's actually owned by the local community as well. So you know that your money is actually going to something worthwhile. So they're these little pod chalets, cabins, and they overlook the Atlantic. Don't get too excited about the view because this area is very foggy a lot of the time. Most mornings, that cold Atlantic air meeting the desert wind just blankets this area in fog, but that kind of adds to the surrealness as that burns off and you start seeing further into the distance. It's really fun. But yeah, each one of these cabins is designed in the interior to feel like a ship. So the main bedroom area, you feel like you're in the hull of a ship, and then you go through to like your bathroom area and it feels like you're in the front of the ship. These little portholes. And each one is actually named after a famous shipwreck. So in each room, there's a board or a sort of poster, and it's the name of your room, and it's a shipwreck, and then the history of that particular shipwreck. So it's a really fun sort of added feature. You're perfectly located to explore the skeleton coast, like we said, all the sort of shipwrecks and skeletons and crash planes. But they also have a lot of other great activities. They do something quite fun here, which is sandboarding. Again, really popular with the families. They got a great collection of sandboards. You head up to the top of these dunes and then race down. It's more difficult than you'd think, but if someone can snowboard, they can generally get the hang of it quite quickly.
Yeah, my kids have done it in Morocco and they loved it.
Yeah,
because it does feel like you're skiing or snowboarding, but you're on sand. So
absolutely. But you're not going to see any other guests when you're at Shipwreck Lodge. You are just hundreds of miles from anything in any direction. It's a very special place, and the architecture is amazing. Gets really cold in the middle of winter with that cold wind coming off the Atlantic, and you're in the middle of a desert, so they have these big, thick sort of throw rugs that they leave draped all over your room, and you just sit in these little cabins looking out over the Atlantic. Got these big glass fronts as well, wrapped up. It's a fun place even in winter.
Absolutely. Okay, well, speaking of winter, let's transition to tell us, what are the best times to be in Namibia, and is it a little bit dependent on where you're going to go?
It's not too dependent on where you go. It's sort of across the country has the same general pattern. You're not going to get a lot of rain at any time of the year. It does get a lot of its rain in sort of November, December, January. Well, that's when it gets all of its rain, but we're talking, inches in a lot of parts of the country. Even that is enough, though, to really transform the landscape. So if you're going there in sort of February, March, you're seeing a very different Namibia to everything that we've just looked at. You're seeing these rolling green fields and these little plants and flowers popping up everywhere. It's a very sort of bizarre way to see Namibia. That being said, it's also very hot during the rainy season. So that sort of November, December, January is not the best time to be there. It's hot, it's rainy. You can do it, but it's not ideal. Mm-hmm. You really want to be traveling that June, July, August, September, October, sort of their winter. That's when it's cooler. Might be like mid 80s during the day, lower 50s at night. It always gets cold no matter what time of year you're going. But you're not going to be having any rain, so you're seeing these iconic destinations as they're designed to be seen. it seems kind of silly going to a desert country and waiting for the rainy season. Kind of misses the point of it. But if you've been to Namibia once during the dry season, it's fun to go back, in the rainy season to see the contrast. But for your first time, yeah, sort of June through September is probably the best months, I would say.
Okay. And then what about combining with other countries? If people want to just come to Namibia, of course you can do that. I know you've done very long itineraries in Namibia. But if people want to combine, obviously Botswana, South Africa are really close. East Africa, would you suggest that? What's your recommendation?
9 times out of 10, I would urge people to do it as a standalone trip. Like we've just gone through, there is so much to see and do. Mm-hmm. You really don't want to be trying to just leave yourself a week at the end of a South Africa itinerary to jump in. So where possible, make it a standalone destination. You can combine it with somewhere like South Africa. If you want to leave yourself a week at the end and go and do Sossusvlei on your way home, you could, but you're not really doing justice to the rest of the country.
Mm-hmm. Would you say you wanted to see most of what we talked about, but not the super remote places? What's the minimum number of days that you would recommend?
Probably about 12 nights.
Okay.
10, 12 nights is probably a good amount of time.
Okay. Then you'll get to see all the fabulous places.
Exactly. And if you can do that with light aircraft, that's the best way, because then you're not doing those long drives in between.
Yeah. And you and I talked about that before, especially if you're going with multiple couples or kind of a more multi-generational bigger group, that the cost differential isn't that strong or isn't that big compared to, doing all the car transfers, but yet it saves you a ton of time.
Yeah, if you can get, I'd say 6 people at a minimum, that pretty much makes a private charter plane worth it. And then you have your own pilot and your own plane throughout. So he'd actually be staying with you at the lodges. So you have that flexibility. When you're ready to leave, you go. And also because it's your own plane, they can fly you different routes between A and B to show you highlights and show you interesting things. So yeah, it's a good way of doing it.
It's nice to have your own plane at your beck and call for 2 weeks.
Absolutely. And it's not as crazy expensive as you think. It's not affordable, but it's not crazy.
Okay. Well, if you're going to save up the money to go to Namibia, maybe just save up a little bit extra and throw in the private pilot and plane.
Exactly.
Well, Scott, thank you so much. This has been super informative for all of us. The pictures, are so beautiful. I think for any of us who are adventurers, active photographers, we didn't even really touch on all the culinary aspects, but there's such, so many reasons to go to Namibia. And I know it's on my list, and I think it should be on everybody else's too. So thank you.
You're so welcome. Couldn't agree more.
All right, good. All right. Well, I know you and I will be in touch, but thank you so much and take care.
Thank you, Mimi. Bye.
Bye-bye.